The great trick the federal government has pulled during these lockdowns is make the economics of support look like some immutable truth that it's just too hard to help everybody, while making the science of lockdowns look like it's some ideological battle that isn't based in fact. And none of that is true. None of that is true. The Chief Health Officer represents a whole bunch of data points from thousands of people, doctors and virologists and epidemiologists, doctors who take a Hippocratic oath, doctors who work in the field of medicine, which only exists to help everybody, to make solutions and interventions and supports for people who are incredibly ill and help them get better. That's the point of medicine. And doctors spend their whole lives trying to solve these problems in a variety of different ways. And it's not an easy job, it's a difficult job. And the whole medical industry is set up to support people. Everyone in the hospitals is there looking after people. All the doctors there are doing rounds and working their asses off to try and look after people. It is a tough gig, and it's a highly skilled gig, and people put a lot of time and effort into it their whole lifetimes, decades of study, never-ending study, decades of work, free work, all of this kind of thing. And it's all evidence-based all the time. That's the point of medicine. If you make decisions that aren't based in the best current available evidence, then you run the risk of losing your registration, getting in trouble, and also going to prison because you've taken an oath to do the best known possible thing for people, always. Now, all of these fantastic interventions that are invented and delivered and whatever aren't always available to everyone, but that's because of economic decision making, not because medicine itself is corrupt or doesn't work. Medicine does work. Medical research does work. So the Chief Health Officer is the person at the front of what is essentially millions of people out there gathering data, checking data, bringing it all together. There is a scientific method at play all the time, and the Chief Health Officer is just the person who is kind of the spokesperson for that, saying, the best evidence that we have at the moment is this works. Here's the evidence we've got. It's continuing to work, etc., etc. Now, they will adjust their advice as the data changes. And some people claim that that's a weakness of medicine or science, but in fact, it is the strength of medicine and science that it will adjust with new data. Unfortunately, we saw these protests on the weekend that were basically anti-lockdown protests. And let's say we've got 10,000 people in the streets across the country saying, let us out, we've had enough. And they're yelling at the Chief Health Officer saying lockdowns suck. And it won't change their minds at all because the Chief Health Officer is not making an arbitrary decision on their own. They're making it off the back of millions of data points. Data that hasn't changed just because the data is frustrating to the protesters. Now, the protesters are understandably incredibly frustrated by the economic damage that it is doing to individuals and businesses across the country. Of course, because it is incredibly detrimental to people to be locked down. They can't work, you can't run your business, you can't get things done, nothing's happening. It's incredibly frustrating, and of course, it is putting people in severe economic distress, and that needs to be addressed. Now, the economic interventions to support people in lockdown and through these times and outside of lockdowns and in COVID and out of COVID are decisions that are ideological. They are made by a very small number of people in the federal government that sit in a room and decide who they want to help and how they want to craft interventions and who those interventions are best for. Medicine is trying to solve problems for everyone. They don't try and solve problems for cancer only for rich people, for instance. But economic decision making is made for the benefit of who the government believes they should look after, which is why we see things like huge grants for coal companies because the federal government cares about those sorts of things. Subsidies for not clean energy, etc., etc. We could go on, but it's a different conversation. The main point I want to make is that the federal government has done such a good job of making the science look like it's ideological when it's not, while making the economics of support look like some immutable truth that you cannot afford to help everybody. Despite the fact that even within this pandemic, within this government, they issued a level of support. It was delayed. It wasn't as broad as it could have been and as it should be. But they issued a level of support that prevented a lot of people from falling into severe economic distress and then reported it as incredibly successful. And then when we find ourselves in the same pandemic public health situation as we were earlier, they've contracted that help. That's not evidence-based. If you make decisions against the evidence as a doctor, you could go to prison. If you make decisions against the data as the treasurer, Some people will want to elect you again, but most people shouldn't. If you want to take 10,000 people and yell at the chief health officer about lockdowns, it won't change their mind, because the politicisation of lockdowns doesn't change their efficacy. And we've seen that in Sydney, where they've politicised lockdowns, and now the chief health officer in New South Wales is saying, yeah, we should lock down, and the Premier refuses to do it, and it hasn't changed the public health advice because the virus is still getting around everyone, putting people in hospital, putting people into ICU, and killing people. The economic support decisions are absolutely in the hands of a couple of people that sit in government. So you could take those 10,000 protesters, and if you went to the Treasurer and said, hey, bring back JobKeeper, increase the job seeker and leave it increased for people who need help, bring back rental moratoriums, make the support for businesses and individuals who can't work more broad, and leave it there until we're on top of these COVID outbreaks. It's going to take a while until the economy opens up. They're going to need support. Leave the job seeker payments at a level that support people, because there's going to be a long tail of economic damage on this. And if you're unsure as to whether they're making decisions in the best interests of you, the stock market had its best day ever in the history of the Australian stock market yesterday. Scott Morrison hasn't put out a single tweet condemning the protests, because he doesn't want to get in the way of people being at each other's throats, because it benefits them to have people yelling at Labor state governments. And it is unconscionable to me that they are leaving people hanging. People need economic support. The government can provide it. Absolutely they can, and they should. Economic support should be broader than they were the first time round, and they should be ongoing. Job seekers should be increased. It should be ongoing. And rental moratorium should be brought in throughout this entire pandemic, because it's insane that we're allowing people to be evicted during these challenging times when we're not even providing economic support. And for all those people who are going, I don't want help, I just want to do what I want to do. Okay, that's cool. That's good. And if Job Seeker and JobKeeper are available to you when we open up, I hope you don't take it if you don't need it, and you just carry on and you do what you want to do. But you're not everybody, and everybody does need help at some point in their life. And if the time is right now, it should be available to them. And if you're someone who sells something or runs a gym or has products or provides a service, you want a market where people can afford to participate in the economy beyond just some groceries each week and paying their rent. And if we're going to have a thriving economy, that's necessary. And if we're going to measure our thriving economy, we need to measure those kinds of outcomes, not just stock market performance, which benefits only a very few people. So if you want to encourage the government to act on the best possible evidence in the same way that the health officers are, and you want to hold them accountable, by all means be annoyed, be mad. It's frustrating. I'm mad. It's mad. It's insane that we had an intervention that worked and then they haven't done it again. That is insane. It makes no sense. If this was a doctor making those decisions, they would literally go to prison. So put the pressure in the right direction. Put the pressure on the federal government to increase the support for people. That's where it needs to go. No matter how frustrated you are, the medical data doesn't change, but the economic decision making can, and that's our job now, is to put that pressure on the federal government and advocate for support for people that's not just us. If you're in a position where you can just go out and work again and you'll be back on your feet in no time, fantastic. That's so great. I am quite literally rapt for you, but there are lots of people who aren't in that position. And we need to make sure that when we're advocating for things, we're advocating for things that help the most people, prevent the most deaths, keep the most people on their feet, make sure the economy hums along in a way that brings everybody along, not just a few. And let's make sure that we all get out of this together, stronger, not divided, angry, weak, and all also economically in pieces because we didn't get the help that we needed when we needed it for as long as we needed, regardless of how we came to need help. In the meantime, look after each other, keep checking in with one another, ring each other up, look after people, and as always, just be nice.